The chaos of the ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan felt distant, like a storm behind thick glass. The lights glimmered across marble floors, bouncing off the endless rows of crystal champagne flutes and the sharp edges of Wall Street laughter. For most people in this room, this was the center of the universe, where old money and new power mingled, everyone desperate to outshine the next. But for me, the mission had narrowed my focus to a single, icy point. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, a black-tie ghost slipping between hedge fund titans, diplomats, and uniformed officers. In this world, I was invisible, exactly as I needed to be. Every step was measured, every glance intentional, every movement a calculation drilled into me by years of military discipline. Tonight was not a night for being seen. Tonight was about saving a life. My target was Admiral Henry Stewart, a living legend in the Navy, and a man whose presence could silence an entire room without saying a word. Even from across the ballroom, you could feel his gravity. He stood near a marble column, perfectly still, a mountain among waves. It was almost easy to forget, in this sea of tailored suits and polished ambition, that men like him moved pieces on a global chessboard while the rest played checkers. As I approached, my mind filtered out the noise, the clinking of glasses, the bursts of laughter, the swirling sense of cologne and ambition. All that mattered was Stewart and the plan I'd been perfecting for weeks. The air was heavy with the kind of tension you only feel before a storm. I moved closer, heart steady, every nerve tuned to the mission. No one here knew my real job. To the outside world, and especially to my father, I was just Grace Miller, a translator working for the State Department, a woman with a knack for languages but no real place at the table. My father had repeated that story so many times I'd almost started to believe it myself. Even now, somewhere in this crowd, he was holding court with old friends, laughing about his brilliant but bookish daughter. He loved to play up the translator a joke, always good for a laugh among his golf buddies. He had no idea what my life really looked like, or what I was about to do. Admiral Stewart's security detail was tight, but not as tight as he thought. I'd studied their patterns, noted their weaknesses, where they watched, where they didn't, the split-second moments when the focus slipped. My dress was chosen not for beauty but for movement, my shoes soft-soled and silent. A different kind of uniform. I reached Stewart's side just as he began to turn away from a conversation with the governor of New York. He barely registered me at first, just another woman in a crowd where men like him were used to ignoring women like me. I leaned in, voice low, every ounce of warmth scrubbed out by necessity. "Follow me, Admiral." No questions. He froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. His posture tensed, and his security detail went on alert, hands moving almost unconsciously toward their earpieces. I could see it all, the way authority clashed with instinct, the way decades of command made it nearly impossible for him to obey a stranger, especially a woman half his age. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice to a whisper only he could hear. "Call sign, Savannah." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then everything changed. The color drained from Stewart's face, replaced by something colder, sharper, fear. Not fear of me, but of the world that single phrase represented. Savannah wasn't just a nickname. It was a code, a protocol known only at the highest levels of military and intelligence. It meant this wasn't a drill. It meant lives were in immediate danger. His body language shifted in an instant, from arrogance to obedience. For the first time that evening, Stewart wasn't in command. He was in survival mode. We took 2 steps away from the column. Behind us, a suppressed thwack echoed like a snapped bone. Marble dust exploded from the pillar where his head had been moments before. The ballroom erupted into chaos, shouts in English and French, bodies hitting the floor. Security converging in a sudden, frantic wave. But I didn't flinch. My mind was already moving to the next step, scanning exits, mapping out our escape. The training kicked in fully now. Protect the asset, control the narrative, get out alive. And somewhere, just yards away, my father still laughed with his friends, completely oblivious. He had no idea that his adjust-a-translator daughter had just become the most dangerous person in the room. 60 seconds before everything went sideways, I'd been standing on the ballroom's edge, blending into the wallpaper as my father held court at a table full of New York's elite. He looked completely in his element, tailored suit, whiskey in hand, the type of confidence that comes from decades spent closing deals in boardrooms from Chicago to Dallas. Tonight, he was performing, as always, and I was a prop in his personal theater. He saw me across the room and beckoned, draping an arm over my shoulder with the casual possessiveness of a man who never quite knew how to be gentle. "Gentlemen," he boomed, "let me introduce my daughter, Grace. She's brilliant with languages, just a translator for the State Department. Keeps us all playing nice with the French." He paused, giving the Admiral a knowing wink, letting the punchline land with a practiced ease. The laughter was polite but empty, and I felt the familiar sting of dismissal settle in my gut, heavy as ever. It wasn't just this moment. It was a lifetime of them, 1,000 little cuts of being underestimated, of having my achievements shrugged off as hobbies, while my brother Liam's sales figures were celebrated like gospel. The Admiral, still unaware that his life would soon depend on me, offered a courteous smile. My father's laugh echoed over the music, another public note in the symphony of condescension I'd learned to play along with. For him, I was always the scribe, the family's a book girl. Smart, maybe, but never impressive in any real way. I remember another Thanksgiving, not so long ago, in our family's Boston home. The kitchen was warm with the smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and my father's pride. He stood at the head of the table, raising a toast to my brother. "To Liam," he said, his voice booming over the clatter of dishes, the youngest VP of regional sales in company history. Didn't just meet his targets, blew them out of the water. The family erupted in applause. Liam just grinned, soaking up the adoration like sunlight. Later, during a lull, I tried to share a little of my world. I told the table, quietly, that I'd just returned from a project in Colombia where my role as lead linguistic analyst had helped dismantle a dangerous cartel operation. My father barely glanced up from his bourbon. "That's wonderful, sweetie. All those years of Spanish are finally paying off." He gave my hand a patronizing pat, like I'd shown him a crayon drawing instead of an international intelligence report. "Did you have to talk a lot down there?" He didn't wait for my answer. "Now, Liam, what about your sales projections for next year?" That's how it always went. In their eyes, I was good with words, useful, perhaps, but never vital. My work for national security was less than a footnote next to a quarterly sales update. But the reality was something entirely different. While my family sat around a mahogany dining table in suburban Boston, my really office was a secure room beneath the Pentagon in D.C., a cold, humming fortress of data, screens, and secrets. No windows, just the constant whir of air systems and the sharp light of classified intel pouring across monitors. This was where I became a Savannah, the code name only a handful of people in the world even knew. I remember standing before the main screen, its blue-green glow flickering over a tapestry of intercepted signals and chatter. To anyone else, it was noise. To me, it was music. Patterns revealed themselves, seemingly random data points clicking together like puzzle pieces. My handler, Director Bennett, was a stern, steel-haired man who'd spent more years in covert operations than I'd been alive. He listened, not just to the words, but to the meaning underneath. I pointed at the evidence, coded messages, movement patterns, references to a fallen eagle, and laid it out flatly. They are planning a symbolic strike on a top-tier target. The chatter matches Admiral Stewart. Likely window, the Manhattan summit. Director Bennett's jaw tensed, but he just nodded. Savannah, you know what this means. I did. My call sign wasn't a gift. It was earned in 1,000 hours of reading the world's darkest secrets. But the gap between these two worlds, my family's soft fiction and my hard reality, was enforced not just by my father's pride but by my mother's fragile hope for peace. That same Thanksgiving, after the dishes were done, Mom found me in the kitchen, her voice low, her expression apologetic. You know how your dad is, Grace. He doesn't get it. Your world is so secretive, so complicated. Just let him be proud of Liam. It's easier for everyone. I understood. My silence bought their peace, a currency I paid without complaint, even as it cost me more than they'd ever know. Standing on the edge of the ballroom that night, waiting for my signal, I felt that old weight pressing on me. For years, I'd played the part they'd written for me, the invisible daughter, the harmless a translator. Their condescension became my camouflage, a shield as useful as any body armor. But tonight, all that would end. Tonight, in the most powerful room in New York, I was done being invisible. And the moment my handler's signal came through, the faint buzz in my earpiece that only I could hear, my two worlds would finally collide. The moment before everything changes is never as dramatic as you expect. There was no thunderclap, no cinematic flash in the crowded ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, just a subtle vibration in my ear, a pulse of coded clicks from my comms unit. No one else heard it. But for me, it was the heartbeat of destiny. In that instant, my father's world, the world of deals and social status, faded into the background. I saw him, drink in hand, face shining with satisfaction, completely oblivious to the storm about to break around him. His laughter, so loud just moments before, now seemed to echo from some distant, naive universe. He didn't know that within a minute, his definition of power would be rewritten forever. Years of quiet frustration flashed through my mind. The family holidays where I was at the nice girl who helps with translations, at the countless times my work was called our hobby, at the patient, patronizing pats on the hand. The price of their comfort had always been my silence. But now, the mission demanded everything I had, the full, unvarnished truth of who I was. My mind shifted into tactical mode. I no longer saw my father as a parent or even as a person. I saw a variable, a potential civilian complication in a developing hostile environment. My emotions faded into the background, replaced by protocol, by the cold logic honed by years of military training. Protect the asset. Neutralize the threat. Execute extraction. The ballroom, all glass and crystal, became a chessboard. Every piece had its place, every move counted. The challenge: extract a 4-star admiral surrounded by his own highly trained security detail, men who, by default, would protect their commander from anyone, including me. Step 1. Break protocol. Establish an authority higher than the Admiral himself. Step 2. Trigger the code. As the signal in my ear confirmed the threat was imminent, I let go of all hesitation. My handler's words from the final briefing echoed in my mind. Savannah, once you're on site, you have full discretionary authority. Your word is law. Act fast and without doubt. We will follow your signal. This wasn't about revenge or validation. It wasn't about family. It was about lives, about neutralizing a threat in the middle of a glittering Manhattan evening, where no one else knew that a single bullet could rewrite the history of a nation. The air in the ballroom grew thick as I moved, every step calculated. My father was telling a story, something about his first big IPO in Chicago, the punchline already on his lips. He barely noticed as I left his side, my focus locked on Admiral Stewart. My body language changed as I crossed the floor, my shoulders squared, my posture straightened, my gaze sharpening into the kind of focus that comes only in the moment before chaos. The crowd, for the first time, seemed to part for me. Admiral Stewart noticed me now, his eyes narrowing, puzzled by my sudden, commanding approach. His security team's training was first-rate. I saw the flicker of suspicion, the shift in stance, the hands drifting toward their jackets. I had seconds to take control. Follow me, Admiral. No questions, I said, my voice so cold and flat that he paused, a fake smile freezing on his lips. His instinct was to resist, to challenge, to assert control. His security detail tensed, unsure whether to intervene. But then I stepped closer, entering his personal space, dropping my voice to a private, lethal whisper. Call sign, Savannah. The words landed like a physical blow. The confusion didn't just fade from his face, it shattered, replaced by that look I'd only ever seen during high-security training, pure, immediate comprehension. The Admiral knew what Savannah meant. He'd been briefed on the code, on the shadow network that sometimes intersected his own world. This wasn't a request. This was an override. He gave a clipped nod, no more questions, no more debate. His whole bearing changed. In that moment, the powerful Admiral vanished, replaced by the soldier who understood death was in the room. We took 2 steps away from the column. Then it happened, a muffled gunshot, the marble shattering inches from where Stewart's head had been. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, chaos exploded. Security surged, civilians ducked for cover, and the orchestra's elegant music dissolved into shouts and panic. But I didn't flinch. My hand went to my cufflink, activating the secure comms line. This is Savannah. Threat active. Secure the West Corridor. Primary exit compromised. Reroute to sublevel Alpha. Go now. Every agency in the building, Secret Service, NYPD, FBI, heard my command. Hardened agents looked to me for orders. In the space of a minute, adjusted translator, it became field commander. The ballroom, a place of status and power, now belonged to me. Through the chaos, I caught sight of my father. He stood utterly still, mouth open in disbelief, all color drained from his face. I saw the moment he realized the daughter he'd always treated as harmless had just become the most important person in the room. But there was no time for sentiment. The plan was in motion, and we were running out of seconds. We moved swiftly, Admiral Stewart and I, flanked by a wave of tactical agents cutting through the storm of confusion in the ballroom. The old protocols were gone. Now, every command came from me. I guided the Admiral past stunned senators and oil executives diving for cover. In a matter of seconds, the entire night had been transformed. What was meant to be a pageant of American influence in Manhattan was now the center of a major security crisis. I felt the familiar adrenaline burn, a sharp, clean edge that brought every detail into focus. Stuart's face was pale, his mouth set in a thin, determined line. Whatever doubt he'd had about me was erased. He understood that survival depended on following my lead. His trust was total, and the irony didn't escape me. It took a threat to his life for a man like that to see me, not as a daughter or a translator, but as a soldier. Keep moving. Don't break stride, I instructed, my voice steady in his ear. The Secret Service detail had already formed a perimeter, hustling us through a stark corridor lined with kitchen carts and startled waiters. The noise of the ballroom faded behind us, replaced by the distant blare of alarms and radio chatter. I checked my watch. Every second mattered now. My mind ran the plan again. Exfiltration through the hotel's west service exit, reroute if blocked, fall back to the underground parking garage. These were more than contingencies. They were habits, drilled into me from my earliest days at the academy. But we weren't safe yet. A burst of gunfire echoed from behind, a warning, not an attempt to hit. The assassin wanted chaos, wanted to scatter the crowd and mask their escape. I pushed Stuart forward, adrenaline making everything sharp, time stretching and collapsing around every decision. West corridor secure, barked an agent over comms. We rounded the corner and hit the service elevator. I keyed in the override, swiped my clearance, and the doors snapped shut behind us. Stuart's chest heaved as he caught his breath. He glanced at me, eyes full of questions. Who are you, really? I kept my gaze forward. I'm the one getting you out alive. The elevator rumbled downward. My thoughts drifted, briefly, to the woman I'd been pretending to be, their good daughter here at the party. That mask was gone now. Here, in this tight steel box, was my real world. We reached the sub-level. The garage was half-lit, echoing with the hum of engines and the bark of commands through static. A fleet of black SUVs idled, engines ready. I scanned the perimeter, nothing out of place, but my gut told me we weren't clear. A moment later, 2 CIA tactical officers, Martinez and Harper, both veterans, greeted us, weapons ready. Savannah, the car's hot. We're set for exfil. I nodded. Let's move. Stuart slid into the back seat. I climbed in beside him, checking the rear view as Harper took the wheel and Martinez covered our flank. The convoy surged into motion, weaving through the labyrinth of underground tunnels beneath the hotel. Sirens wailed in the distance, the city outside unaware of how close it had come to disaster. I glanced sideways at Stuart. He was calm now, eyes calculating, starting to piece together the puzzle. I've read about the Savannah Protocol, he said quietly. Didn't know it was active in New York. It's active wherever it's needed, I replied. He nodded. And you're not just a translator, are you? I almost smiled. Not tonight. For the first time, I let myself exhale. The mission had worked, so far. But I knew the real fallout was just beginning. The incident would spark investigations, finger-pointing, new security reviews. The Admiral's life had been saved, but in doing so, I had blown my own cover, at least for the people in that room. And, of course, for my father. As the car sped away from the Waldorf, I caught a glimpse in the side mirror, flashing police lights, a line of stunned guests stumbling out into the street, faces lit by news camera flashes. In the back, among the crowd, I spotted my father. He looked lost, small, stripped of his armor of confidence. The world he knew, where power came from boardrooms and money, had just been turned upside down. He had seen the moment I took control. He had heard me give orders. He had watched agents with earpieces and weapons snap to attention at my words. The truth had shattered his old narrative, and I wondered what story he'd tell himself now. The SUV merged onto the FDR Drive, Manhattan's skyline fading into the rear view. Harper kept us moving, silent and sharp. My phone buzzed. Director Bennett. Status? He asked. Asset secure. One casualty, no civilian injuries. Suspect still at large, likely a contractor, not a lone wolf. Understood. Full debrief at 0600. Copy that. I hung up and sat back, the weight of the night pressing in. The adrenaline was already fading, leaving exhaustion in its place. But I knew rest would have to wait. Across from me, Admiral Stewart watched quietly. When he spoke again, his voice was different, lower, more respectful. I owe you my life, Savannah. That's not a debt I forget. It's what I signed up for, sir, I replied. He studied me for a long moment. You know, there's a rumor at the Pentagon about the Savannah Protocol. That it's never failed. I shrugged. Rumors are just stories, Admiral. The truth is usually messier. He smiled, a real one this time. Still, I'm glad you were on my side tonight. As the convoy approached the secure facility in Brooklyn where would be debriefed, I thought about what waited for me in the morning. The questions, the media storm, the shifting landscape of trust. But for now, I let myself feel the tiniest spark of satisfaction. The girl who was just a translator had written her own story tonight, and it was only just beginning. By sunrise, Manhattan felt like another planet, a city that ran on routine, indifferent to last night's secrets. But for me, everything had changed. I stood in a cramped, windowless conference room deep in a federal building in Brooklyn, still in the same evening gown, boots swapped for government-issue sneakers. My hair was tied back in a tight bun. My badge read Savannah, but no one called me by name. The debrief was brisk. Director Bennett entered, accompanied by two officials from Homeland Security and an exhausted FBI liaison. The air was thick with tension, part relief, part anger at how close we'd come to disaster. Bennett's questions came rapid fire, but my answers were measured, professional. I described every detail, how I'd tracked the threat, how I'd moved the Admiral, how I'd recognized the shooter's MO as Eastern European, probably ex-military. The officials took notes but avoided my eyes, as if meeting my gaze would force them to recognize me as more than an asset. I'd become adept at hiding behind the invisible shield of competence. When the debrief ended, Bennett lingered a moment. You did good work, Grace. But there will be fallout. Are you ready for it? I'm always ready, sir, I said, but the words tasted like old pennies. Ready? Maybe. But prepared for what it would do to my family? Never. He gave me a rare, approving nod. You'll be called to DC in 3 days. Command wants a full breakdown. Get some rest. But rest was the one thing I couldn't find. Later that afternoon, I walked out onto the Brooklyn Promenade, trading classified corridors for the cold, honest air above the East River. I let my thoughts unravel at last. My phone buzzed, a dozen missed calls from my mother, 2 from my brother Liam, and one number I didn't recognize but instantly knew, my father's. He had never called me at work before. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the city breathe. Tourists snapped selfies with the Statue of Liberty. Cyclists sped by. Life continued, gloriously unaware of what almost happened the night before. A memory came, unbidden, me at 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in Boston, my father hovering over a spreadsheet while I puzzled over a book of codes and ciphers. "Why do you waste your time on that stuff, Grace?" He'd asked, amused. "You should be learning Excel." Even then, I'd known I was different. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Grace?" My mother's voice was shaky but determined. "We saw the news. They said there was an attack at the Garler. Please tell me you're safe. Please tell me." "I'm safe, Mom. I promise. Everything's okay." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Your father, he's confused. He saw you. He saw what you did. He doesn't know how to process it." "I know," I replied softly. "He's proud, Grace. But his also, she hesitated. He just never expected it." I stared out at the river. "Neither did I. But it's over now. You don't need to worry." "I always worry," she said, with a sigh as old as motherhood itself. The media storm hit by evening. News helicopters circled the Waldorf Astoria, live feeds showing shattered marble and shell casings. Experts speculated about terracells, organized crime, inside jobs. The public story would never match the truth. No one would mention Savannah, or the protocol that had quietly rewritten the rules that night. My brother Liam texted late. "Was that really you on the news? Dad's freaking out. I'm proud of you. Call if you need anything." I smiled, just a little, at his words. We had never been close, too different, too many years of comparison, but maybe now that could change. Or maybe not. The world was shifting beneath all our feet. By midnight, my mind wouldn't let me sleep. I replayed every second of the operation, every decision, every risk, every heartbeat. There was a deep ache inside me, part exhaustion, part grief for the old illusions I'd shattered forever. I checked my email. Buried beneath the official memos and classified briefings was a short message, subject line. From Henry Stewart. Subject: Thank you. Text: I owe you more than I can say. If you ever need anything at all, you have my full support. I hope we meet again, under better circumstances. There was something else attached, a scan of an old photograph. Stewart, much younger, with a group of women in uniform at Annapolis, one of them a young, determined-looking cadet. A note in his handwriting. We all serve in different ways. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Sometime near dawn, I got a final message, this one from my father. No subject. No greeting. Just a single, honest line. I don't know who you are anymore, Grace. But I hope someday I can understand. I stared at the screen, torn between relief and sadness. For years, I'd wanted his recognition. Now, Finally, I had it, but it came with distance, not connection. I typed out a reply and then deleted it, twice. Finally, I wrote, "I'm still your daughter, Dad. Just a different version than you expected." I hit send, closed my laptop, and watched the first rays of sunlight creep over the Brooklyn Bridge. The city was waking up. And so, I realized, was I. The days after the attack blurred together in a haze of official meetings, phone calls, and headlines. In New York, business life quickly reclaimed the Waldorf Astoria, as if gunshots could be forgotten by breakfast. But for me, the world felt irrevocably changed. My old life, the safe, invisible routine of being just the translator, had vanished with the crack of a single bullet. 3 days after the gala, I boarded the Acela Express to Washington, D.C., my duffel bag packed with uniforms instead of party dresses. The train sped past frozen marshes and grey winter rivers, but my mind replayed fragments of recent days, my father's lost eyes, Admiral Stewart's gratitude, my mother's worried voice. And the silence that settled now between me and the life I'd once led. At Union Station, Director Bennett was waiting, stone-faced as ever. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, adjusting the strap on my bag. "Let's get it over with." The Pentagon was even more of a fortress than usual, a hive of activity as news of the attempted assassination sent shockwaves through the upper echelons. As I was ushered through layers of security, more than a few heads turned. Some recognized me, most did not. That was how it always worked in my line of service, until, suddenly, it didn't. Inside the secure conference room, a dozen high-ranking officers and analysts waited. The screen behind me displayed satellite photos, blueprints, threat assessments. But for once, all eyes were on me. Major Grace Miller, a director Bennett announced, breaking protocol by using my real name in a room full of brass. Lead linguist and intelligence officer, code name Savannah. She's the reason Admiral Stewart is alive. The silence was palpable. I felt the weight of it, a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. I delivered my report without hesitation, how the chatter was intercepted, how the shooter exploited a weakness in the ballroom's west entrance, how the Savannah protocol worked in real time. Questions followed, some technical, some political, some thinly veiled as challenges. "Was it luck, Major?" Ear General pressed. "No, sir. It was training and preparation." A flicker of something, approval, passed through the room. When the meeting ended, Admiral Stewart lingered behind. He approached me with the purposeful stride of a man who'd spent his life commanding ships. But his expression was softer than I'd seen before. "Major Miller," he said, extending his hand. "What you did in New York, it wasn't just brave. It was decisive. You saved more than one life that night." I shook his hand, surprised by my own steadiness. "Thank you, Admiral. Just doing my job." He held my hand for a moment longer, meeting my gaze. "You changed how I see things. How a lot of us see things. Don't let anyone put you back in a box." I nodded, unsure if I felt pride or a strange ache of grief for something lost. That night, I sat alone in a government-provided apartment in Arlington, the city lights of D.C. twinkling through bulletproof glass. I ordered bad takeout, left the TV on for background noise, and tried to write a letter home. I wanted to explain to my parents, especially my father, that I was still me. Just more complicated now. But each draft dissolved into half sentences. Dad, I know you're confused. I'm confused, too. Mom, I wish I could promise it gets easier. The truth was, I didn't know what came next. My career had been built on secrets, on blending in, on being underestimated. But after Manhattan, that cover was gone. I was a known quantity now, both to my allies and, undoubtedly, to enemies. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother, just 3 words. I love you. And another from Liam. Take care of yourself, sis. My father hadn't written again. The following morning, Director Bennett called me into his office. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a letter, signed and stamped. Director, Predictive Threat Analysis Division, Major Grace Miller. Congratulations, a Bennett said quietly. It's yours. You'll be building the team. You've earned it. It took me a moment to realize what it meant: a promotion, a mandate to lead, the opportunity to shape the very protocols I'd lived by. And with it, the end of my field career. Savannah was being retired, not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded. I looked up at Bennett. Thank you, sir, for believing in me. He shook his head. You believed in yourself first. Just remember that. I left his office into the noisy corridor, the weight of the past week finally hitting me. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a quiet, complex peace. The world was moving forward, with or without my permission. I would have to move with it. I walked outside, letting the cold air sting my face. The Potomac shimmered in the morning light. I pulled out my phone and, on impulse, typed a message to my father. I got a promotion. Heading up a new division. Maybe one day you'll let me explain. No reply came. But for the first time, I didn't need one. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I was just moving forward, my own way. It took weeks for the buzz around Manhattan to settle down. In Washington, word spread quickly about the new Predictive Threat Analysis Division. My new title carried weight: Director Grace Miller, the youngest woman to ever lead such a unit in the Pentagon. There were whispers, congratulations, and a fair share of skepticism from people who still saw me as the translator. But the truth was, I didn't care about proving anything anymore. I threw myself into the work, building my team, vetting analysts, consulting with tech companies and special operations liaisons. We turned a forgotten floor into a nerve center: glass walls, endless screens, live feeds tracking global threats. I named it the Watchtower. The first days were a blur of long hours and fast decisions. Some nights I stayed at my desk, running simulations while the rest of DC slept. Sometimes I'd glance at my reflection in the window, half expecting to see that old version of myself, the daughter quietly taking notes in the background. But each time, I just saw a soldier in uniform, eyes sharp, carrying a different kind of authority. Despite the new status, the feeling of being on the outside lingered. At meetings, some generals still called me a Ms. Miller. Some old guard analysts grumbled about my protocols, my push for transparency, my refusal to play politics. She's too young. She's too by the book. She's not a warfighter. But I remembered what Admiral Stewart had told me: don't let anyone put you back in a box. Every day, I reminded myself I was here because I had earned it, because when the moment of truth came, I acted. Not everyone in this city could say the same. One evening, As I was reviewing a new threat matrix, potential unrest brewing in Europe, my assistant, Serena, poked her head into my office. "There's a visitor for you. He says he's not leaving until he gets 5 minutes." I almost laughed. "Who is it, Serena?" "Admiral Stewart." I stood, smoothing my uniform. "Send him in." He entered with his trademark mix of command presence and humility. Now, out of crisis, he looked both older and lighter, as if he'd shed some old burden in Manhattan. "Director Miller," he said formally, but his eyes crinkled with warmth. "You're even harder to reach these days than the president." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Comes with the job, Admiral. But for you, I'll always have time." He sat, looking around the watchtower. "Impressive. I hear you've rewritten the playbook." I shrugged. "We're just making it up as we go along, same as always." He studied me for a moment. "You know, I've been asked to brief Congress about the Savannah Protocol. It's become standard procedure for high-level diplomatic security." I felt a wave of pride and a trace of sadness. "I'm glad it's useful, sir." He nodded. "It's more than useful. It's necessary. You changed the game for everyone." We sat in silence a moment. Then he added, more quietly, "Your father called my office. Wanted to know if I'd share your record with him. I told him it was classified. But I also told him he had a daughter to be proud of." I was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Admiral. That means more than you know." He smiled. "You're not the same woman I met in New York. But then again, neither am I. Take care, Director." With that, he left me with the city lights and the sound of my own heart, steady and sure. Later that night, alone in my office, I sifted through digital files, summaries, reports, requests for transfer. My phone vibrated. An email. The subject line was simply, "Grace." It was from my father. "The Admiral told me some of what you do. I won't pretend to understand all of it. I don't know if I ever will. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not just for what you did, but for who you are. I hope, in time, you'll forgive me for not seeing it sooner." I stared at the words for a long time. Once, they would have been everything I wanted to hear. Now, they felt like a closed chapter, important, but not essential for where I was going. I replied with a single line. "Acknowledged." Then I closed the email, leaned back, and allowed myself a rare smile. There was nothing left to prove, not to him, not to anyone. The watchtower was quiet. Out the window, the city looked endless. For the first time in my life, I felt not invisible, but entirely seen. Not by my family, or even my colleagues, but by myself. A new mission was beginning, and this time, I was writing the rules. Spring arrived in Washington, D.C., and with it came a sense of restless energy. The cherry blossoms turned the city into a haze of pink and white, and the river sparkled with sunlight. It was a season of renewal, but I felt caught between two lives, the old patterns I'd outgrown and the new world I was still learning to navigate. My days were spent deep in the watchtower, managing threats and briefing generals, but at night I'd walk by the Potomac, letting the city's noise blur into a background hum. Sometimes, I'd see families picnicking, children racing along the paths, And I'd wonder if my own family could ever find its way back to that kind of simple connection. One Saturday, Liam called unexpectedly. He rarely reached out unless it was about Dad or something practical. "Grace," he said, voice uncertain, "Mom wants us all to come home next weekend. She says it's important." I hesitated. After everything, the distance, the secrets, the roles we'd been forced into, could I really just walk back into my childhood home? "Will Dad be there?" A pause. "Yeah." His. Different now. Quieter. "I think he wants to talk to you. For real this time." Part of me wanted to refuse, to stay safe in the world I'd built for myself. But the other part, the part that still remembered backyard barbecues, Red Sox games on the radio, and helping Mom in the kitchen, tugged me homeward. I drove up to Boston that Friday, passing through familiar neighborhoods shaded by old maples. Our house looked the same as always, weathered blue paint, a flag by the door, Mom's tulips blooming beside the porch. Inside, the kitchen was filled with the smell of her lasagna. Liam was already there, stacking plates. He gave me an awkward half-hug, his usual armor of confidence replaced by something softer. Mom greeted me with tears and a long embrace. Dad was last to appear, older than I remembered, wearing a cardigan instead of his usual suit jacket. We ate dinner together, conversation tentative at first. Liam talked about his new promotion. Mom filled the silences with stories about her garden, and Dad watched me, searching for the right moment. Finally, as we cleared the table, he spoke. "Grace," he began, voice trembling just a little, "I've been thinking about a lot lately. About you. About how I never really saw what you were doing, or who you were becoming." I set down my glass and met his gaze. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, like the two of us were the only ones in the world. "I wanted you to be safe," he said. "I thought if I kept you close, if I made your life simple, it would protect you from disappointment. I didn't understand that you needed more, that you were more." He stopped, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry. I was wrong." I felt the years of silence and longing stretch between us. But for once, I didn't feel anger or hurt, just a quiet relief. "I'm still your daughter, Dad," I said gently. "But I have my own life now. I'm not the same girl who sat at your desk with a book of codes. I can't ever be that girl again." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I wouldn't want you to be. I'm proud of you, Grace. No matter where you go, or what you do." Mom squeezed my hand, and Liam smiled, a real, honest smile that made him look like the brother I'd missed. We talked late into the night, not just about the past, but about the future, about forgiveness, about change, about the things we'd lost and the things we could still rebuild. Back in DC, the watchtower hummed with new energy. My team was growing, analysts from every corner of the country, each one bringing their own strengths and stories. We were building something together, something that would outlast any one mission or protocol. One evening, Serena found me on the observation deck overlooking the city. "Long day?" she asked, offering a mug of coffee. I nodded. "Feels like every day is a long one." She grinned. "That just means we're doing it right." We watched the sunset over the Lincoln Memorial, the city glowing gold and pink. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of belonging, not just in my job, but in my skin. A few weeks later, Admiral Stewart invited me to a quiet dinner with a handful of officers and their families. It wasn't an award ceremony or a high-level briefing, just a simple meal, people who understood the cost of service and the value of trust. At the table, I listened as others shared stories of mistakes, of second chances, of the ways family and mission always seemed to collide. I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't alone. Every person in that room carried scars from battles no one else could see. Stuart raised a glass at the end of the night. To those who do the unseen work. To the ones who hold the line when no one else knows there's danger. And to new beginnings. I raised my glass too, surrounded by people who knew the truth about me, and still welcomed me. On my way home, I walked along the river. The city lights danced on the water. My phone buzzed, another message from Dad. Thinking of you tonight. Hope you're safe. Love, Dad. This time, I replied right away. I am. I hope you are too. For the first time, the words felt easy. No weight, no history, just simple and real. Summer came to DC, humid and golden. Thunderstorms rolled over the city, sweeping clean the monuments and soaking the parks where families picnicked under wide oaks. At the watchtower, we worked through the heat, the rhythm of global crises never slowing. But in the midst of it all, I found a new kind of steadiness inside myself, a sense of balance I'd never had before. I was, for the first time, at home in my own story. On the surface, my life looked impossibly different than the one I'd grown up expecting. I rarely saw my old friends. My days were a whirlwind of threat briefings, high-level meetings, and the endless challenge of keeping the country safe. But there was clarity now about what mattered and what never really had. One night, after a late meeting with Homeland Security, I walked alone along Pennsylvania Avenue, passing joggers and diplomats and the occasional tourist taking photos of the Capitol dome. I let my thoughts wander, free from the armor I'd worn for years. I thought of my father, who now called me just to ask how I was, never to lecture or dismiss. Of my mother, who sent postcards with photos of her garden, each one signed, "I love you, proud of you, always." Of Liam, who invited me to his house for holidays, who told my niece and nephew stories about Aunt Grace, the real-life hero. My family hadn't changed overnight, but something between us had. We saw each other clearly now, not as disappointments or expectations, but as people. That was enough. At work, my division had grown into a model for the entire intelligence community. The watchtower became a symbol of what a handful of determined people, outsiders, dreamers, a scribes, and a translators, it could accomplish if given the chance to lead. I learned to delegate, to trust, to build something bigger than myself. My old need to prove my worth had faded into something quieter, the daily satisfaction of service, of making a difference, even if only a handful of people would ever know. Sometimes, I'd pause at the giant map on our main screen, a living tapestry of risk and possibility, and feel the awe of it all. I was no longer invisible. My power wasn't just in reading signals or anticipating threats, but in writing the orders that others followed. In my hands, words became actions, and actions saved lives. On the anniversary of the Manhattan Gala, Admiral Stuart invited me to a private lunch on the top floor of a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. There were no security details, no official speeches. Just two people who'd crossed from survival to leadership. He raised his glass. "You know, a year ago, I thought I understood what strength looked like. I thought it was about rank, or experience, or never letting your guard down. I was wrong. Real strength is in knowing when to trust, when to follow. You taught me that, Grace. I smiled. I learned something too, Admiral. That sometimes the best thing you can do is step out of the shadows, even if you're not sure the world is ready to see you. He nodded. Here's to writing your own rules. To making your own name. Back at the watchtower that evening, I looked around at my team. Serena with her ever-present mug, Harper and Matiners reviewing data from Eastern Europe, 2 new interns laughing over a late pizza delivery. I felt a rush of gratitude. These people weren't just colleagues. They were my chosen family. I opened my email. One last message from Dad. The world's a safer place because of you, Gracie. I hope you never forget that. Love, Dad. This time, the words didn't make me ache for something I'd lost. Instead, I felt whole. I hit e-archive, and not to hide them away, but to mark them as a memory, one I could revisit, but didn't need to chase. I turned back to my desk and opened the night's first briefing. There would always be another threat, another challenge. The work would never be finished. But I wasn't alone with it anymore, and I wasn't hiding. The city glowed beneath me, alive and restless. My story was no longer about being the daughter who disappointed, the sister who was overlooked, or the woman mistaken for a background player. I had written myself into the narrative, word by word, action by action. And this time, I was the one giving the orders.